Hi, um, my name is Maya Dalwaka. Don't know if you knew that. And I did my final context report on the playwright Betty Shamieh and her plays Roar and The Black Guide. So, yeah. Betty Shamieh is a Palestinian-American playwright born in San Francisco, California, with a sustained passion for writing and theater. And here's a little bit about me. I also happen to be a Palestinian American born in San Francisco to parents who have encouraged my involvement in the arts and in my ethnic background. So when I heard we could pick basically any playwright we wanted, seemed perfect. I chose Shamieh for a few reasons, one of which being that we are not only uncannily similar, but our families probably know each other. Palestinians have a knack for finding one another in the States. The other being that the theme of this class was voices in protest, and I figured that it would be highly off-theme of me to wait for someone else to represent me. So here I am, representing myself. Shamieh's work in particular, her more political work, which we'll talk about more later, centers around being Palestinian or Arab American in a pre- and post-9/11 world. It demystifies belonging to a group that is suspect, as well as reinforces an idea of Palestinian identity that can be particularly hard to grasp since our parents aren't really from anywhere. Quick biography. Betty Shamieh was born and raised in San Francisco, as I mentioned earlier, in a very Arab American household. She's always been very vocal about her ethnic identity, even since grade school. She attended an all-girls Catholic high school, as most Arabs here are Christian, if you didn't know. During her high school years was Operation Desert Storm, which was an enormous trigger for anti-Arab sentiment here in the States. She has degrees from both Harvard and the Yale School of Drama, and though she wrote about Palestinian American topics and issues in graduate school, she chose not to produce or show them until much later. Shamieh was initially very wary of bringing her cultural heritage into her work. Part of it was fear of the hot-button issue of the modern Middle East. Part of it was that writers of color and women are quickly pigeonholed by the theaters they work with. In August of 2001, Shamieh's semi-autobiographical play Chocolate and Heat was getting vast word-of-mouth publicity from the 2001 New York International Fringe Festival. When September rolled around, her theater was going to extend the run, and then the world changed. Though she had her fears about continuing, they ultimately did continue the run of the show. Also during this time, the summer of 2001, Shamieh began working with a group of mostly female playwrights that named themselves as Arab American. Not all of them were Arab, but since it was a label they offered and countered and were proud to, they began working on a project to sort of demystify Arabness in America. The project, Sajil, or Record, was based on tape recordings taken of Arab and non-Arab Americans when asked what they thought of when they heard the word Arab. In 2004, Shamieh was awarded a National Endowment for the Arts grant as well as selected as a Clifton Visiting Artist at Harvard. In 2006, she was named a Playwriting Fellow at Harvard University's Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Studies. In 2009, she worked as an artist in residence in Holland, which is just really cool. In 2011, she was named a UNESCO Young Artist for Intercultural Dialogue. In 2016, she was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship for Drama and Performance Art. Her work isn't meant as agitprop. In fact, she doesn't particularly care for it. It's meant to broaden perspectives just a little bit, to humanize the dying Arabs in the Middle East for an American audience. That being said, being Palestinian, writing Palestinian or Arab, particularly post 9/11, is inherently political. In her continued work, she tries to emphasize the part we ourselves play in our own marginalization as an aspect of our lives that we can influence and control. Shamieh has authored 15 plays, including Again and Against, Territories, and Chocolate and Heat, and has branched out into performance art lecture, opera, and lyrics and libretto. Additionally, she is taught at Columbia Barnard, Denison, and Manhattan College. Roar follows the Yaqub family, consisting of mother, Palestinian Christian Karima, father, Palestinian Muslim, Ahmed, and daughter aspiring singer Irene. Irene isn't very good. When Karima's sister Hala, a musician and quote-unquote loose woman, is forced out of Kuwait with the rest of the Palestinian population after the First Gulf War, she comes to stay with them in Detroit, Michigan. As the play unfolds, a complicated family history comes to light. After the Elul al-Aswat, in which their family was decimated and Hala, at the time a child, was raped, Karima became set on leaving for America. The sisters met two Palestinian Muslim brothers, Ahmed and Abe, who had visas, and after Ahmed won a coin toss, he wed Karima and the two left for the United States. Hala and Abe dated for a while, but Hala broke his heart when she decided not to marry him. She wants to marry him now, which is part of why she came to stay with Karima and Ahmed. Abe establishes himself as a small record label in the States, but because he based his career on being an Egyptian Jew rather than a Palestinian, he had a falling out with the family, in particular with Karima. But when Hala, fresh from Abe's rejection, and Ahmed, frustrated with Karima's insistence that he never play music from back home, are caught kissing by Irene, the family is thrown into chaos. Ahmed and Hala decide to leave for Jordan, leaving Karima and Irene on their own. Up until now, Karima had been the family's engine. She was the reason they were able to eat every day, have a roof over their heads, collect rent on the apartments they owned. But Ahmed and Hala's departure leaves her unable to work. Irene, 15 at the time, stops going to school so that she can continue running their party store. You know, the liquor store that literally every Arab runs or has a family member who runs. You know what I'm talking about. She calls her Uncle Abe, asking that he hire her for a full-time job so that they can sell the party store, move into one of their apartments, and leave room for Irene to get her GED and continue pursuing her passion for music. Roar was Shamieh's second play after the semi-autobiographical Chocolate and Heat. Her plays, and Roar in specific, seeks to channel the voices of Arab women she's surrounded by, powerful, articulate, and downright hilarious. Her heroines are grappling with emerging selfhood and the way their culture is felt in their inner lives, because children of Palestinians are easy victims for identity crises, since, you know, our parents aren't from anywhere. Additionally, something that spoke to me about this play was that everything kind of took place around the kitchen table, and that to me is a very Palestinian, very Arab American thing. It all happens with tea, signaling the passage of time, the whistling kettle, and picking apart parsley and making sure there's enough parsley, and the furniture covered in plastic. The Black Guide centers around 4 Palestinian women who find each other in an afterlife that they think is supposed to be heaven, though grievously lacking in hot male virgins waiting to bend to their every whim. 3 of them are looking for their martyrs, and one claims to have just left the room where the martyrs spent eternity. Delilah has come looking for Samson. She shares her story of how her clan convinced her to become Samson's weakness, how she caught his attention and became his favorite, how that preference grew into something like love, and how she betrayed him because though she loved him, she loved her people more. Tamam lived through the Crusades and is the most insistent upon finding her martyr in that room, her brother. She shares how her name means enough because as the 7th of 7 daughters, her parents were eager for a son. Sure enough, the next child was a boy who grew up to fight in the Crusades. When he was captured and being tortured by the Europeans, Tamam went to the jail laden with baskets of food in the hopes that she could appeal to their humanity and at least make sure that her brother was fed. They accepted the food and then raped her in front of her brother. When he was released a few weeks later, he joined a resistance group in hopes of avenging her honor. He died in the fighting, and Tamam regrets having only told him, "Don't go," instead of, "You're going for you, not for me, and if you were doing this for me, you would stay." When Tamam finds herself in the afterlife, one of the first things to happen is that she is allowed to castrate the men who raped her. She elects not to, instead telling them that she'll come back later, so that they live in fear of her. so that they exist in fear of her. The architect is a modern Palestinian-American woman who has a vivid imagination but isn't the most articulate. She describes working with a man she calls half-breed because his mother was white and we are raised and taught by our mothers. She tells the other women about how when she was 30 and working with him, she turned down a date with him, but when she was near 35, she decided it was no longer cute to be a virgin and called half-breed up. His response was, "Fly on over," so she did it. She bought a plane ticket and, while settling onto the plane, had a vivid fantasy/daymare about the plane being boarded and comprehending what they were saying, being able to stand up and speak to them in perfect Arabic to save the passengers. She fantasizes how her actions would change the perspectives of those passengers. Instead, when her plane is boarded, she does comprehend faster than anyone else, but she doesn't actually speak Arabic, nor does she try to. She locks eyes with a man who's chubby like her brothers. He knows her as Arab, but turns away. She died on the plane that crashed into the Twin Towers, and she's here in the afterlife looking for the stranger who saw her. Throughout the play, the architect kept insisting that the last woman, Aisha, was familiar, and here's why. The night before boarding her flight, the architect had been perusing those sites of hate to remind herself that her existence is a victory. And on one of those sites, she found a picture of Aisha next to a young girl who'd been the only other victim of Aisha's suicide bombing in a Palestinian refugee camp. The picture had been posted with the caption, "Finally, they are killing one another." The play ends with the architect leaving the space, which they have now determined is limbo, and with Delilah, Dammam, and Aisha chanting on stage that little hands make big change. Just a little bit of context as to the name of the play and to the reference to the hot male virgins. Earlier, in the Quran, the death of a martyr is announced as a wedding to the black-eyed virgins, or the huri. So yeah, that was Aisha's expectation of the afterlife, which she didn't get. Some of the themes of this play is one that Tamam introduces, oppression as the coin maker. You drop a person in and you press all the right buttons and you watched as they get pinched and squeezed and squashed until they pop out as a coin with two sides. On one side there's the martyr and on the other there's the traitor. This play is also about Palestinian voices, specifically about uplifting the story of Palestinians, or if you prefer the term of biblical renown, Philistines, who in the past have gone silenced, about finally asking the questions that challenge the unquestioned answers that lie before us, about demystifying the acts of violence in the Middle East because violence is the only way this country listens, and about reaffirming that violence isn't the voice my people need because all it does is remind onlookers that even we think we're dispensable. Now, on to why I chose this playwright and how she interacts with the Western canon. First off, shamieh claims inspiration from playwrights that are now staples in our society. In her introduction to The Black-Eyed, she talks about how the preface to A Streetcar Named Desired was such an inspiration to her. In fact, it directly inspired Roar, and it gave her the clarity of identity she needed to put The Black-Eyed into motion. In an interview with the Montreal Review, she discusses how Tony Kushner, which, if you want more information on him, you can scoot on over to Diana's context report, because Tony Kushner is a playwright who defies characterization and is one of the playwrights she admires most. Some of her more recent work is deeply embedded in Shakespeare, and specifically in adapting a story about Shakespeare's Malvolio from the Twelfth Night. I also chose shamieh because if 14 years in education have taught me anything, it was that I can't wait around for academia to represent me. Let's be perfectly honest with each other. It's not, at least not while I'm in it. This, right now, is the first time I have ever been able to enter an academic space and see myself on the page, and I had to do that myself. I am Palestinian. I am from nowhere, and the government I was born to seems to want to keep it that way. Symbols of resistance for my people, like the shamieh, have been adopted as fashion by the oppressor. My grandparents still have dreams of returning home to villages and family homes they've not set foot in for decades, and being able to give the key to us, to their grandchildren. My grandfather can't eat pasta because of the time he spent as a political prisoner. My people are in camps in the country they were born in, and their parents and their grandparents were born in, and no one talks about it. And so finally I chose this work because it's easy when we're talking about colonization in our comfy classrooms, or in times of ye old plague, our bedrooms, to forget that it's not just a figment of the past, that active colonization is happening right now as we live and breathe in the Middle East. We talk about how colonization is a bad thing in theory, and then turn around to perpetuate it in practice, in our educations, in our art, in our politics, and in our wars. America isn't an underdog, nor does it support them, and it hasn't for a long time. And we don't talk about that. It's easier not to. It's easier to say that active colonization happened a long time ago and that we're doing better now. But a post-colonial framework approaching texts, artwork, and history that support a colonial past is not enough to make an anti-colonial present. Thank you for your time. This has been my context report. I hope y'all have a good day. I'll see y'all later.